found Mr. Rusty in what he called a bit of a state. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Well, I'll tell you if you don't go too far away," said Mr. Rusty. "It's the television." "Oh?" "Yes, they've lost their announcer. It's very careless of them, but they do come and go, you know." Zebedee arrived. "What's going on?" he said. "Trouble on the telly? Hector's house on fire? Baba gone home to Africa? Dougal doing the weather forecast?" "Worse than that," said Mr. Rusty. "We've got to find an announcer," said Florence, "or no one will know what's going on." So they set out to find an announcer. "Me," said Brian. "How about me, man?" said Dylan. "Me?" "We'll have auditions," said Florence, "then everyone can try." "Look, I don't like to seem pushy," said Dougal, "but Robert Dougal is a friend of mine." But Zebedee thought that friends in high places was an unfair advantage, and everyone should have an equal chance. "Choose something to announce and announce it," he said. "Ladies first." Drink more milk?" said Ermintrude. "Support your local cow. Thank you, darlings." "She looks as though she could do with a bit of support," said Dougal. "The weather forecast is as follows. If I lie down, it'll rain. If I stand up, it will snow. And if I don't do anything at all, you have to count 3 and run. Thank you." "Was I lovely? "Very good," said Florence. Zebedee said it was Dylan's turn next. "Pardon me, ma'am. Thank you. Children, fellow citizens, fellow dogs, allow me to say a few words about flower power. As you know, I am a virtuoso on the guitar, and if I can remember a song, I'll play it for you. Dylan?" "Yes, ma'am. I shall go and put on my spotted bow tie." Brian was next. "I should like to give you a short talk on the behaviour and loveliness of the common or garden snail. Anyone got a pair of steps?" Dylan laughed. And so did Dougal. "Yeah, I think you're all rotten," said Brian. And Zebedee said perhaps Dougal should have a try. "Who, me? Me? Oh, yes. Yes. Fluent," said Brian. Dougal had to have a piece of sugar to calm his nerves. And Florence asked him what he was going to announce. "I'm thinking," said Dougal. "My brain is at fever pitch." "We're all agog," said Florence, looking at the Radio Times. And Dougal did his celebrated imitation of a dog eating sugar. Zebedee asked Florence whether she would like to audition. "Oh, no," said Florence. "Coward," said Dougal. "Have a go," said Brian. "Well," said Florence, "all right." Everyone was delighted. Except Florence. "The set awaits," said Zebedee. "Get to it." "Don't be nervous," said Dougal. Friends," said Florence. Viewers," she said. "Time for bed," she said. Mr. Rusty was reading a book. "Very interesting, that. Yes, very interesting." "What's that?" said Florence. "A book," said Mr. Rusty. "I found it in an old junk shop, and it's very interesting. You have a look." So Florence did. "It's all about magic jugs and bottles." "Oh, yes," said Florence. "Very interesting." "Of course, I don't believe it," said Mr. Rusty. "Why?" said Florence. Oh, you asked me that a bit suddenly," said Mr. Rusty. "Oh, I'm not sure why." Florence called Zebedee. "Hello all," he said. Have a read of that book, said Mr. Rusty. So Zebedee read it, thoroughly. Do you think it's true? Said Florence. Well, anything's possible, said Zebedee. And Florence became very excited. Careful, said Zebedee. I bought something else, said Mr. Rusty. But they were so busy getting excited about reading about magic pots and things, they didn't see Mr. Rusty's other bargain. Until it had arrived. Amongst them. I told you, said Zebedee. I do, said the pot. I'm a pot. We can see that, said Zebedee, but what sort of pot? A talking pot, said Mr. Rusty. I foresee a little trouble, said Zebedee. No need to be like that, said the pot. Oh dear, said Zebedee. Now don't worry, said Florence, I'll go and look for it. Yes, well that's what I'm worried about, said Zebedee. What was that whooshing noise? I heard a whooshing noise. I hate a whooshing noise. Did you hear a whooshing noise? No, said Florence. Ears bad? Certainly not. Oh, and I don't think it's nice to imply that I'm hearing things. I wasn't. I am renowned for my observation and hearing. Oh! How do, said the pot. How do? What is it? Hissed Dougal. I'm glad you asked me that, said the pot. I am a magic pot with magic spots, and unless you do as you're told, you'll cop it. All right? No, it is very far from all right, said Dougal. You are an uninvited pot. Don't be like that, lad, said the pot. You don't want to upset me, do you? It's a matter of supreme indifference to us, they say. And then they wished they hadn't. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. What have you done? Said Dougal. Yes, yes, what? Said Florence. I warned you, said the pot. Come back at once, said Dougal. Zebedee arrived. Are you going to change them back? He asked. No, said the pot. Oh, said Zebedee. Then you'll have to go. And he went to see what he could do. Oops, try again. Florence and Dougal felt very strange, and Dougal had to have some sugar to calm his shattered nerves. I've never been a flower before, said Florence, and Zebedee said she was lucky not to be a flower still. Have a piece of sugar, said Florence. It always seems to help Dougal. Here you are. Watch it, said Dougal. An elephant never forgets, you know. Now, what was I trying to remember, said Zebedee. Oh, yes, time for bed. Is this the day we were going to have our picnic? Said Mr. Rusty. Yes, it is, said Florence. Have you got everything? Everything? Said Mr. Rusty. Yes, for the picnic, said Florence. Oh, yes, the picnic, said Mr. Rusty. And he went away, mumbling. They waited for him. I hope you've remembered the corkscrew, said Zebedee. But if that's all you forget, it should be a great success. Off you go. So they went. Dougal was ready for the picnic. Got everything, he said. Corkscrew? No one ever remembers a corkscrew. Well, we've remembered, said Florence. And a tablecloth, said Dougal. I'm not eating off the bare ground, you know. I've got to have a tablecloth. Damask. None of your plastic. Oh, come on, said Florence. Mr. Rusty wasn't sure they'd remembered everything. I feel sure there's something, he said. I've remembered the salt and pepper, said Brian. I am the most useful and resourceful of snails, you must admit. Altogether now, for he's a jolly good fellow. Now that'll do, Brian, said Florence. Sorry, said Brian. Now, will here do, said Florence. Any ants, said Dougal. I can't abide an ant. We're not all here yet, said Mr. Rusty, waving the corkscrew. Ermintrude arrived. Oh, I love a picnic, she mooed. It's so lovely, eating out of doors. What is she on about, said Dougal. She always eats out of doors. It's a well-known habit of cows, eating out of doors. I'll bet no one's remembered a corkscrew, said Ermintrude, and salt and pepper. Oh, yes, we have, said Mr. Rusty and Brian. So there. Dylan arrived. I've brought these cushions for the picnic, he said, because I feel everyone should be comfortable, ma'am. Comfort is very important at picnics. Mr. McHenry had brought all sorts of useful things like knives and forks and spoons and plates and vases of flowers and placemats. No finger bowls, said Dougal. Florence took the cushions. Nearly ready? Said Dylan. Then I'll arrive. Looks very pretty, said Brian. And Dougal and Florence agreed. And so did Mr. Rusty and Ermintrude. Very pretty, they said. There's just one thing, said Dylan. Did anyone bring any, food? Food? Said Mr. McHenry. I don't think I can bear it, said Dougal. And they all realized they'd forgotten to bring the food. We're all soppy, said Brian. No one can possibly realize how humiliated I feel, said Dougal. Hello, said Mr. Rusty. Hello, said Florence. Just giving the old barrel a turn, said Mr. Rusty. Yes, I heard it, said Florence. Zebedee arrived. Shall we go? Said Florence. Why not? Said Zebedee. Yes, why not? Said Florence. In the garden, she looked for Dougal. Who was looking for her, somewhat agitatedly. Ah, there you are. Oh, I'm very glad to see you. I can't tell you how glad I am to see you. Why? Said Florence. Oh, I wish you hadn't asked me that, said Dougal, because I don't know how to break it to you. I know you're very fond of her. Who? Said Florence. Who? Oh, I don't think I should tell you, you know. Oh, dear, oh, dear, oh, dear. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Now, who, Dougal? Ermintrude. I'm afraid she's been affected by all those poppies she's been eating. Poppies? Said Florence. Well, it's either that or the pansies. I don't know which is worse. But whatever it is, the poor old thing's in a very bad way. I think her moon-jumping days are over anyway, if she ever did it, which I doubt. It always seemed a very unlikely story to me. Very unlikely. Dougal, said Florence, will you kindly tell me what this is all about? All right, said Dougal. That cow is flying a kite. Kite, said Florence. A kite, said Dougal. C-I-T-E, kite. She is flying a kite. How lovely, said Florence. Lovely, said Dougal. It's unnatural. Cows don't fly kites. Cows eat grass and do a lot of mooing and lying about in fields and things of that nature. Well, perhaps she felt like a change, said Florence. That's hardly a reason to fly a kite, said Dougal. I've brought you a few flowers to nibble, said Dougal, kindly. Bless you, dear boy, said Ermintrude. What are you doing? Said Dougal. I'm flying my kite, said Ermintrude. Very relaxing. Would you like to have a try? It's very kind of you, said Dougal. Well, hold on tight, said Ermintrude, with reason. What? 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 Help! 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 It's a very good kite, said Ermintrude. I do hope he doesn't lose it. I hope we don't lose Dougal, said Florence. Oh, don't worry, dear thing, said Ermintrude. He'll come down to earth, eventually. Florence rushed to the scene. All right, Dougal, she said. You cannot imagine, said Dougal, how infuriating a question like that can be when you've just been up in a kite and crashed. Florence was waiting for Zebedee, who arrived. I'm a bit late, he said, because I was trying to get a ticket for the exhibition. What exhibition? Said Florence. The one in the garden, said Zebedee. The one everyone's been talking about. It's very difficult to get a ticket, so I wouldn't bother to go if I were you. You won't be able to get in, and then you'll be disappointed, won't you? Oh, you are infuriating, said Florence. Of course I shall get in. Dougal and the others were waiting. Hello, said Florence brightly. Got your ticket? Said Dougal. Very difficult to get in without a ticket, you know. Got a ticket? Oh, Dougal, said Florence. Dylan told her she didn't have to have a ticket. Do I have to have a ticket? Said Ermintrude. No, ma'am, said Dylan. Anyone with a tail gets in free. So, you qualify, he said, laughing. When you're all quite finished, said Dougal. Lead on, mighty leader, said Brian. And they all went to the exhibition, which Florence had been asked to open. I declare this exhibition open, she said. Very prettily done, said Dougal. It was an exhibition of pictures. How lovely, said Florence. Not quite the word I would have chosen, said Dougal. Anigonioni's latest, I presume. Brian found a picture he liked. What delicate brushwork, he said. That'll look very good in my kitchen. This one seems familiar, said Ermintrude. Is it you, Florence dear? They looked at Brian's portrait. A very good likeness, said Ermintrude. Yes, but has it caught the essential me? Said Brian. Nothing's essential about you, said Dougal. Now, don't be unkind, said Ermentrude. They looked around some more. Dylan and Brian admired the carrot picture as connoisseurs. 4 carrots in a fog, said Dougal. Look over here, said Ermentrude. My effort, ma'am, said Dylan, modestly. I mace you, said Ermentrude. You wouldn't stand still, said Dylan. Well, I like it, said Brian. You like anything, said Dougal. Well, I think they're all lovely, said Ermentrude. Don't you? Yes, they said, even though Dougal had some doubts about Brian's portrait, and said so. And they all had doubts about another portrait. For some reason, it seemed a little familiar, although they couldn't place the face. What I want to know, said Dougal, is what she's laughing at. She's smiling, said Florence. Well, I think she's got a very funny look on her face, said Dougal. And I wouldn't want to meet her in the garden after dark. I can tell you that. Come to think of it, I wouldn't want to meet anything in the garden after dark. Mr. Rusty told Florence that he'd been thinking. It's a long time since I went on holiday, he said. Oh, were you thinking of going now, then? Said Florence. Well, yes, said Mr. Rusty. I can't think where to go, that's all. Well, we'll ask Zebedee, said Florence. He's good at holidays. I heard that, said Zebedee. Go and see Dougal. He's best at holidays. You know, said Mr. Rusty, I'm not too sure about the wisdom of this. Look. Hello, Dougal. Welcome, said Dougal, to the Dougal Travel Service. Holidays arranged, satisfaction guaranteed. Brian helping? Said Florence. Yes, said Dougal heavily. I certainly am, said Brian. I work out the best way to go with my map and my powerful brain. What map? Said Dougal. Wolverhampton, said Brian. Wolverhampton, said Florence. It's a lovely place, said Brian. Yeah, but I'm not sure that's where I want to go, said Mr. Rusty. Oh, I can see we're going to have difficulty with this client, said Brian. Doesn't want to go to Wolverhampton. That poses problems. Well, I don't want to be difficult, said Mr. Rusty. Yes, they all say that, said Brian. And Dougal explained that everything had been prepared for the Wolverhampton tour. The special luggage was all ready, for instance. And the tropical kit, said Brian. Gets very hot in Wolverhampton, especially if you keep your vest on. Well, I don't want to be difficult, said Mr. Rusty again. But I don't want to go. How about Stoke-on-Trent? How about abroad, said Florence. Abroad, said Brian. Ooh, that's tricky. You don't want to go abroad, said Dougal. All those foreigners milling about as though they owned the place. Really, Dougal? Well, what's wrong with Britain? I could offer you the Grand Canal, Manchester, or the Doge's Palace, Dundee, or the Leaning Tower of West Ham, said Brian. But Florence and Mr. Rusty weren't interested. Well, in that case, we'll have to think of something else, said Brian. Florence apologized for being difficult. Oh, well, that's all right, said Dougal. We really wanted to go somewhere exotic, they said. More exotic than Wolverhampton, said Dougal. Brian fetched more travel books while they prepared for an exotic holiday. How about China, said Florence. Brian and Dougal went quite pale. "China," said Florence. "China," said Mr. Rusty. "The very place," said Florence. But Brian and Dougal weren't too sure. "Can you arrange it?" said Florence and Mr. Rusty. "At once?" "Are you quite sure you wouldn't prefer the hanging gardens of Leeds?" said Dougal. And Mr. Rusty and Florence said they were absolutely positive. "China or nothing," said Florence. Dougal consulted Brian. "How do we get them to China?" "Bicycle?" said Brian. "That," said Dougal, "is a soppy suggestion. It would take hours. And anyway, what are they going to say in Wolverhampton?" Florence told Mr. Rusty that she felt energetic, and Mr. Rusty said he thought that was a very good way to feel. In moderation, of course. "But it's a long time since I felt energetic," he said. "Very long time." "Oh?" said Florence. "But I was very good at the hop, skip and jump in me youth," said Mr. Rusty. "Very good indeed." "I'd like to have seen that," said Florence. "It was a sight, I can tell you," said Mr. Rusty. "A rare sight. People came for miles to see me do the hop, skip and jump. A rare old sight." "Don't you do it any more?" said Florence. "Not a lot," said Mr. Rusty. Zebedee arrived. "Everyone feeling energetic?" he said, "because there are great goings-on in the garden." "Right, everyone here?" said Dougal. "Then I'll begin. Today, as you know, is the day of the great race." "I didn't know," said Florence. "You're not the only one, dear heart," said Ermintrude. "Well, I know," said Brian, "and I am the very popular captain of my team, which consists of 1 snail, 1 rabbit, and 1 cow. It is a race against the clock, 1 lap of the track, and no using bicycles. All right? Everyone understand?" Dougal set the clock. "We each have to carry something," said Brian. "Perhaps someone would care to carry me," said Ermintrude. "I'm quite light." "Now stop messing about," said Dougal. "Sorry, dear thing," said Ermintrude. "Who's going to start?" said Brian. "I will," said Florence. "Go on then," said Brian. And Florence went. "Stop!" "Something wrong?" said Florence. "You didn't say ready, steady," said Dougal. "Oh, Mr. Perfection," said Brian heavily. "Ready, steady, go." And Florence went again. Mr. Rusty, who had to go next, waited nervously for Florence to come back, checked it was really his turn, and set off, showing some of his old hop, skip and jump vigor. "Bravo," said Ermintrude. "Who would have thought he had it in him?" Dylan wondered if he'd stay awake long enough to take part. "Play up," said Ermintrude. So Dylan played up. I'm not quite sure I can finish the course like... Oh dear, I'm like exhausted. But Zebedee was a flying umpire, and Dylan found he had to go. "Whose turn?" said Brian. "Yours, Snaily dear," said Ermintrude. And Brian showed them what he was made of, with a little help from Zebedee, like pointing him in the right direction. Dougal waited, and then set off. He got a little sidetracked by a pile of sugar. Oh, the temptations they put in your way these days. What shall I do? "Remember the team," said Zebedee. Oh, the team," said Dougal. "What's keeping him, I wonder?" said Ermintrude. And when Dougal came back, off she went. "Oh, I feel such a fool." Zebedee said they'd wait for Ermintrude to get back and then decide the winner. Ermintrude did finally get back, and Zebedee declared her the winner. "I owe my victory to clean living and vegetarianism," said Ermintrude. Florence asked Dougal how he was. "Well, I've got a new collar on and it's not broken in yet." "Collar?" said Florence. "Of course," said Dougal. "You don't expect me to come out undressed, do you?" "Oh, no," said Florence. "I suppose that would never do." "It certainly wouldn't," said Dougal. "But I didn't know you wore a collar," said Florence. "I mean, I've never seen you wearing one." "Are you accusing me of nudity?" said Dougal. And Florence was just assuring Dougal that she wasn't accusing him of anything, far be it from her, etc., etc., when something came along. "Morning all," said the violin. "Stradivarius Smith's the name, but you can call me Strad, if you've a mind. I've come to give you the benefit of my company, and if I find I like you, I may rip you off a short concerto. I shall require complete silence, but you don't look like a noisy lot. Am I right? Eh? Am I right? Eh?" "I don't know what this garden's coming to," said Dougal. "Does the BBC Symphony Orchestra know about you?" "Hmm?" "Orchestra," said the violin. "I'll have you know that I am a soloist." "Oh, temperaments," said Dougal. "Hush," said Florence. "Come with me," said the violin. So they went. "This is where I live," said the violin. "I give midday concerts to a very distinguished audience of musical trees." "Yes, he does, said the tree. Florence was amazed, and so was Dougal. "I can see you are amazed," said the violin. "They are amazed," said the tree. Amazed. Florence couldn't get over it. The trees were amazing. "As an audience, they're a bit rustly," said the violin, "but they come in useful in many ways." "Like they come in handy for quartets and things," said the violin. Dougal was very bewildered. The violin produced some strings. "We leave nothing to chance," it said. "Yes, I can see that," said Florence, also bewildered. "And now I'd like you to meet someone very special," said the violin. "My baby." "No one will ever believe it," said Dougal. "Oh, it's lovely," said Florence. "Lovely." "That's my little Pitsy," said the violin. "Short for pizzicato." "Really?" said Florence. "Takes after his dad, does Pitsy. Always on the fiddle." "That's the oldest joke I have ever heard," said Dougal. "Sorry," said the violin. "Couldn't resist it." Florence called to Zebedee, who arrived. "Look," said Florence. "It's called Pitsy," said Dougal. "Well, I'm not surprised," said Zebedee. "It looks like a Pitsy." "When he grows a bit, I'm going to try to get him into the Halley," said the violin. "Good idea?" And Florence said she was sure it was. "It's all madness," said Dougal. Florence and Mr. Rusty were waiting for Zebedee. "He's late," said Mr. Rusty. "As usual," said Florence. "Am I late?" said Zebedee sweetly. "Yes," said Florence. "Kindly explain." So Zebedee explained that he'd been having a look round, and there seemed to be something happening in the garden she might be interested in. But of course, if you're angry with me for being late, you probably won't want to go, he said. Oh, you, said Florence. She's late, said Dougal. Children nowadays, really. Am I late? Said Florence. Not at all, dear thing, said Ermintrude, much to Dougal's disgust. There's too much rush these days. Everyone rushes about like a bull at a gate. Ooh, what am I saying? But be that as it may, I shall take my time and browse along. And you never know, the odd flower may find itself chomped as I go, but at least I won't rush. I shall strike a blow for leisure. Brian was running a raffle. It's in aid of shipwrecked snails, he said, and I want you all to buy a ticket, 1 carat each. You're joking, said Dougal. Mr. McHenry bought one. Very wise, said Brian, and I hope you will be the lucky winner of a wonderful prize. Dylan bought one as well. When's the draw? They said. When I've sold all the tickets, said Brian. That'll be the day, said Dougal. But Florence bought one. I wouldn't trust that snail with a tram ticket, said Dougal. Isn't it exciting? Said Florence. Huh, said Dougal. I wonder if I'll win, said Florence, hopefully. All right then, any more for any more, said Brian. Oh, get on with it, said Dougal. Great oaf. Want a ticket then? Said Brian. No, I do not, said Dougal. Oh, go on, said Brian. Be a sport. You might win something, Dougal, said Florence. And the others urged Dougal to get a ticket. So finally, he did. Congratulations, said Brian. All right then, said Dougal. What happens now? Do we choose our prize? Said Florence, hopefully. No, not quite, said Brian. Not quite. I knew there'd be a catch in it, said Dougal. Florence read her ticket carefully. What's it say? Said Dougal. It says this ticket must be given up in return for laundry, said Florence. So does mine, said Mr. McHenry. I knew it, said Dougal. The rogue. But it also says there's a special prize for the lucky number, said Florence. Lucky number of what? Said Dougal. Ah, said Brian. Oh, look, said Florence. That must be the prize. Dougal inspected. I wonder what's in there. A year's supply of lettuce? Yoo-hoo! You know, I've always wanted to do that. Well, that's a prize, said Brian. Ticket number 4. Ticket number 4? Gasped Dougal. And the lucky winner gets a kiss, said Ermintrude. Where are you, dear thing? I've gone abroad. Oh. Florence asked Mr. Rusty if Zebedee had arrived yet, and Mr. Rusty said he hadn't. Oh, said Florence. And Zebedee arrived. I hear tales of cooking in the garden, he said. Now, let me see. Have I got everything? Oh dear, people come to plague me. We haven't come to plague you, they said. We're spectators, they said. Oh, joy, said Dougal heavily. What you making, old cooker? Said Brian. Pancakes, said Dougal. You're lovely, said Brian. Florence read the recipe. What next? Said Dougal. Milk? Said Florence. Ah, well, yes. Well, I am waiting for the milk, aren't I? Said Dougal. About time, said Dougal. herbs? Said Florence. Yes, I'm waiting for those too, said Dougal. The herbs arrived. Here we are, said Mr. McHenry. Essence of herb, straight from the garden. Well, perhaps I can get on now, said Dougal. Yes, I think you probably can, said Florence. And Dylan said he'd play some pancake music to help things along. Dylan dropped off, but the pancake making went on. Dylan, refreshed, played on. When are we going to, eat, man? Said Dylan. Oh, I love a pancake, said Ermintrude. Florence cooked the first pancake. Now, careful, said Mr. Rusty. Don't burn yourself. Now, toss your pancake in the air. That's the right way. So Florence tossed the pancake. Bravo, said Ermintrude. My turn, said Dougal, but Dylan got there first. Suits you, Snail, said Dougal, giggling. I'm a failure, man, said Dylan. Yes, you are, said Brian. Hit me right on the bonce. Are you implying my pancakes are heavy, said Dougal. I make the lightest pancakes in the world. I'll have you know, in the trade, they are known as Dougal's Delights. Mr. McHenry had lost something and was looking for it. Wherever can it be, he said. Florence came along. Hello, she said. You haven't seen it by any chance, have you? Said Mr. McHenry. Seen what? Said Florence. It's escaped, said Mr. McHenry. It's very worrying. Dougal was looking for something too. Now, where is it? He said. What? Said Florence. What's everyone looking for? I can't find it anywhere, said Brian. No, you wouldn't, said Dougal. Typical. Don't be like that, said Brian. What is it? Said Florence. I don't know, said Brian. I was just told to look for it, and I always do as I'm told, because I'm little and lovable, and everyone takes advantage of me. Of course, I mention no names, but watch where my eyes rest. I can't find it, dear heart, said Ermintrude. Well, it's big enough, said Dougal. Nevertheless, said Ermintrude. Really, said Dougal. It would help if we knew what we were looking for, said Ermintrude. Exactly, said Brian. We need information. Can't find it, man, said Dylan. Nowhere. I'm not surprised, said Ermintrude. Suddenly, they heard something. That's it, said Dougal. What is? Said Brian. That, said Dougal. Scatter and find it. So they scattered to find it. I scattered the wrong way. A strange object appeared. That's it, hissed Dougal. It landed. Oh! Well, I never, Whatever next? That was it, said Dougal. If I'd known, I'd never have looked, said Ermintrude. What a fright I got. Was that it? Said Brian. Yes, was that it? Said Dylan. Like, it? And they said it was. Crazy, said Dylan. I couldn't agree more, said Ermintrude. Horrible thing. Mr. McHenry came back and told them he still couldn't find it anywhere. They asked him what he was looking for. Well, it's my new flying planting machine, he said. It flies. Does it indeed, said Dougal. Yes, it does, said Mr. McHenry. I call it the flying saucer. That's what I wanted you to find, said Dougal. Well, we found it, dear thing, said Ermintrude. I don't want to worry anyone, said Dylan. What do you mean, said Mr. McHenry, worried. Well, it's that machine of yours, said Dylan. It's like driving me crazy. It keeps planting things, and every time I want to take a little sleep, it wakes me up and plants something on me. I got an earful of primrose roots, man. I mean, flower power is one thing, but this is ridiculous. Ridiculous. Time for bed, I suppose, said Florence. How do you expect me to sleep, said Dougal, with that thing about? Dylan woke up and began to think about his life. Like, where am I going? Is it true what they say? Do I sleep too much? Dougal was having a little think as well. Now, where's that rabbit? It's got to stop. The time has come, definitely. You know, I don't think I've ever once seen him leaping about like a rabbit. And what about all this hole digging he's supposed to do? Not one single hole dug in years. He's getting rabbits a bad name, that's what he's doing. Now, I'm as tolerant as the next dog, but it's got to stop. He'll be growing his hair next and voting Liberal. Dylan's worries about his life were making him walk in his sleep. And when he woke up and found himself on his feet, he got more worried than ever. I'm cracking up, he thought. Oh my, oh my, oh my. What shall I do? He groaned. You have a problem, little furry mate, said Brian. I can tell by your nose. You leave my nose out of this, said Dougal. Zebedee asked what the matter was. That rabbit, said Dougal. He'll have to go. That rabbit had decided that a few gentle exercises might be a good idea. And perhaps a little sprint. All he needs is a little exercise, said Zebedee. He should get a dog. What am I saying? He went to see Florence, who was doing a few exercises too. They're worried about Dylan, he said. Oh, said Florence. I'd better go and see then. Dylan was still at it, swimming, using a stool instead of water, even though water would have been less hazardous. Shadow boxing, which he found even more exhausting. 7, 8, 9, 10, out, they said. Now, what do you mean about my nose? Said Dougal. Well, when you get worried, it twitches, said Brian. Florence asked Dylan if he thought the exercises were doing him any good. Do you feel any better? She asked. Ma'am, I feel dreadful, said Dylan. I'm beginning to think a person shouldn't try to change his natural way of life. And with me, sleeping is in, and exercises out, 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 out. I wonder, said Florence. Now listen, said Dougal. Oh man, spare me, said Dylan. Can I help it if I'm naturally, lazy? Now listen, said Dougal. But Dylan didn't. He's running, said Dougal. You know, it's time for bed, said Zebedee. Yes, I could do with a sleep, said Dougal. Touché. Dougal and Florence were up rather late one day, and wondering where all the stars had gone. Do you think it's cloudy? Said Florence. Well, that would be the simple explanation, said Dougal. What do you mean? Said Florence. Well, you never know in this place, do you? I expect someone switched them off. Oh, can you do that? Said Florence. Can you do it? Of course you can do it. Oh, I didn't know, said Florence. The ignorance, said Dougal. No, I didn't come here to be insulted, said Florence. Hoity-toity, said Dougal. And anyway, I'm not at all sure you're right, said Florence. Have you ever known me to be wrong? Said Dougal. Florence looked at him. Well, I mean about basic, well-known things like stars, said Dougal. I may have made little errors in the past about minor matters. Well, I'm only human, you know. But you're not human, said Florence. Well, if you're going to get personal, said Dougal, you can go and look at the stars with someone else. I shan't care. And he got all huffy. Now, there's no need to get huffy, said Florence. Who's huffy? Said Dougal. I'm never huffy. I only said you weren't human, said Florence, and you get huffy. I thought we came to look at the stars, said Dougal, huffily. So they counted the stars, which had come out during the argument, and found there was still quite a lot missing. Yes, quite a lot missing, said Dougal darkly. Someone has been tampering. So they counted them again. I make it 1 short now, said Dougal. I wonder where it is, said Florence. Dylan arrived. I found the craziest thing over there, he said. Over where? Said Dougal. Over where? Why, over there, man, said Dylan. Craziest thing you ever saw. I presume eventually he'll tell us what it is, said Dougal. But Dylan said he'd show them what it was. And it was the missing star, come down into the garden for a change of scene. It's a bit dark here, isn't it? Said the star sweetly. Well, what do you expect? Said Dougal. You're supposed to be up there shining away. On strike, I suppose. It's very pretty, said Florence. Thank you, said the star. You may call me Estelle. Estelle, said Florence. Well, it should be Stella, but I've changed it, because I think Estelle is much more suitable these days, don't you? Any star who is anyone is called Estelle. I don't know what this garden's coming to, said Dougal. I really don't. Oh, you, said Florence. Listen. Oh, I feel like lighting up, said the star. Back to work, I hope, said Dougal. Oh, I wish I was a star, said Florence, sighing.